So now that we're in a new era and we have these texts, why can't we just pick a little bit of Bhagavad Gita, pick a little bit of Patanjali, and figure out what's convenient for us and fit it into our life? Can we still be yogis and do yoga like that?
You can do anything you want. We have the human form of life, and we have free will, and we have agency to make our choices. The problem with our, modern day, I don't know if it's a problem, but one of the features of our modern day spirituality is precisely that we have all of this information now, which wouldn't have been the case in the ancient world. I mean, India, people may have had exposure to different traditions, but not on the vast scale that we have now. We have Taoism and Christian Gnosticism and all of these traditions. And our tendency is to do precisely that. But what usually happens is that we jettison anything to do with discipline and austerity and tapas but yet when we consider these paths, they all have tapas. There has to be discipline. I mean, it's the first thing in Kriya Yoga. The first word in chapter 2 is tapas. Then svadhyaya, then ishvara pranidhana. So there has to be discipline. And the problem with picking and choosing, just following the dictates of our own mind, is our mind is going to then pick and choose whatever is convenient and not arduous. And so we put together this sort of spiritual melange, and maybe we become a little sattvic, but we're never going to get deep, it seems to me, the deep profound truths of any of these traditions unless we go deep. And the idea of a tradition is that we accept something beyond our own minds and the fickle choosing of our own mind. Oh, I like this and I like that, and I don't like brahmacharya, we'll toss that out, I'll chant Om.
And it creates confusion also because if there's one way, there's a reason for maybe that path. Maybe Patanjali had a reason for the order of tapas, svadhyaya, ishvara pranidhana.
Sure.
Maybe there's an order. And then if we start picking and maybe changing the order, or maybe,
right.
I don't know.
But if we do that, under whose auspices are we doing it? We're doing it under the auspices of our minds.
So we're back in.
And we're back in the state of the mind, which is what causes us all the suffering. And why do we take a spiritual path in the first place? Because we're suffering. Because we're suffering. We're mentally unhappy, and that's why we seek some kind of truth. We seek a spiritual path because we're suffering. It's the first noble truth of Buddhism, sarvam dukkam. It's only when we realize that we're suffering that we consider taking a spiritual path. And so the problem with trusting our own mind is that same mind is what has caused us so much, caused so many of our problems in the first place.
The sensual mind that is looking to be
it's
gratified.
looking to be gratified. It's not looking to perform too much tapas if it can wiggle out of it. So accepting a tradition means to accept an authority that's beyond your own mind. So, so one chooses, obviously we read about the different traditions and we examine them, we apply our intellect and critical, analysis, and we use logic and all of that. It's not that we blindly take some blind leap of faith. So we scrutinize a tradition, but at a certain point, typically in India, a person then, if we do want to go beyond our own mind and its fickle choices, is we accept the entirety, the whole package. We accept that we somehow have faith that this is a path that has been trod by many, many generations of seekers. We read the writings of those seekers. We look at their ethical behavior. We look at the examples that and somehow we have faith that these are individuals that have transcended their minds and have attained some kind of a higher spiritual enlightenment. And rather than just picking and choosing and then but according to the dictates of our mind, we accept them as our guides. And if that means austerity, and if that means following yamas and niyamas, we make that commitment. And that way, instead of jumping around, picking and choosing, cherry picking, it's better. It's good to do that, so we get a nice broad view of the landscape, the spiritual landscape. Also, because we generate respect. When you study different traditions, you realize they all have their coherent, their beautiful theologies, their attractive features. So we do all of that. But at a certain point, if you keep doing that, we're just jumping. The mind's just vrittying around. The whole point is to get beyond the vritties of the mind. So at some point, we have to locate our path, locate our teachers, locate our lineage, and then go deep. All the time, respecting everything else, but at some point find our path and go deep into that path and accept and accept a higher authority, accept the opinion of those who have trodden that path. We do that in every other walk of life. If you're walking on the Himalayas and just blindly go walking, you accept the trails of guides that have done it many times. We do that in every sphere of life. So why should the spiritual journey be any different? So picking and choosing might be okay for a neophyte, might be okay for someone that's wants a little spirituality but still has a lot of attachments in the world.
Dip their toe in the ocean.
That's fine. It's all good because that little dip is still going to have nice, sattvic effects. But if you really want to attain the deep level truths of these traditions, then at some point you have to commit to the path and the whole package.
And there might be also, like you mentioned in the beginning, perhaps the seeker is reading the Bhagavad Gita and maybe that does something, but then they read the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali and then that speaks to them, and maybe then you have to see, we have to taste the different kinds of food before you figure out which one is your favorite one and which one you want to splurge on.
I want to eat pizza every day for the next 20 years for lunch. No.
Yeah. But I think that, maybe that's a start when they're, picking, but then I understand your point that if you just commit yourself to one that maybe is the one that really speaks to you in the best way that you can understand, and really dive in, go to the deep end.
And if that means accepting inconvenient things, rules and regulations, obviously we have to make a distinction between what was relevant in past times. Like, some rules and regulations, may not be relevant anymore, but
that's
when it gets tricky, and that's why it's important to have a lineage, because lineages are dedicated to preserving these ancient practices, but at the same time there's lineages of teachers and they have their communities, and they're also adjusting things according to time and place, while nonetheless preserving the core of those traditions. And so in India you do tend to have these spiritual traditions of India tend to be lineage embedded, whether they're Shaiva, they're Vaishnava, they're Shakta. They tend to come in these lineages which gives some kind of security. There's something beyond just the choices of our mind. I mean, if you trust your mind, fine. I don't trust my mind at all because I see how much trouble my mind is always getting me in. So I'm very happy to accept the minds of those whose minds are more controlled and who've attained states that I aspire for. So if they tell me don't eat this and don't do that, I'm very happy to follow that. I have faith in that. It all depends on how much faith you have in your own mind. If you have faith in your own mind, then why do you need to follow any path at all? Create your own path.
No, this is a way of, you have to be coachable too. So then your teachers can help you along your path.
If you're humble. And then humility, of course, is a whole other thing. And humility is to recognize that we mess up all the time whenever we trust our own judgment. At least I certainly do. And humility is to recognize our own fallibility and to be open to the possibility that there are those who have gone before us that have surpassed the challenges that we're facing and attain some higher state of enlightenment.
And they can hold our hand and help us along the way, perhaps.
Yeah, and we examine their life. We look at their ethics. We look at their behavior. We make sure that that their lifestyle, their examples, they have to be absolutely exemplary. But the idea of then accepting that guidance, we do it in every other sphere of life. Of course, in the spiritual life, that can be open to incredible abuse, tremendous abuse, and we have no dearth of horror stories of guru-disciple abuse. So this is also another whole other area. So therefore, the yamas and niyamas are non-negotiable. Very important. Patanjali, non-negotiable. It's not so that someone becomes a guru all of a sudden can start compromising the yamas and niyamas in the name of some higher esoteric spirituality. That Patanjali is very clear about that these are non-negotiable. So we look at the behavior of those that pose as teachers, and it has to be absolutely exemplary. And so there's a checks and balance system in India. It's Guru Sadhu Shastra. That the guru has always, his behavior has always got to be confirmed by the shastra, by the text, like Patanjali, who says the yamas and niyamas are non-negotiable. Everybody has to follow them. So that's shastra, and there's many, many other shastra. So there's the guru, and then there's the guru, sadhu, and the shastra, the sacred text, and then the sadhu, which is the community of practitioners. They're all. It's kind of like a checks and balance system.
When there's an ethical guru.
It has to be. If the guru is not...
Who's really following the text.
The text.
Like B.K.S. Iyengar.
Yes, but you have to be able to evaluate the guru from the text. That's part of your checks and balance system. And that guru is part of a lineage. That lineage will have a community. So if a guru starts acting in a questionable manner, then the community will perceive that. The guru is going to have peers. Okay, the disciples may be junior, but the guru should have peers, and those peers will start saying things. So in some ways, there's something of a checks and balance system.
But we have nothing like that in the United States.
Well, we could have that. Well, I think we do. Some of these lineages, yeah. I mean, some of the, it's only been 50 years. These gurus, these lineages were transplanted in the 60s. Kashmir Shaivism with Muktananda, Gaudiya Vaishnavism with Bhaktivedanta Swami, Advaita Vedanta with a number of different gurus. That's 50 years is nothing. And it's true that these gurus came and they were just lone individuals, and they, in a sense, they extracted themselves from this checks and balance system, right? Because they came and their disciples didn't know anything about Shastra. So that, in the early days, they couldn't read Shastra and say, well, why is the guru doing this and that? It doesn't, right? But now, after 50 years, we're much more informed consumers. We're informed consumers. We have access to the texts. There are communities. Even when the gurus, even some of the fallen gurus, have still left communities that are still,
That's true. That's a good point. I never thought about that. It's true.
But it is a tricky business. But anyway, to go back to the main point is, do you trust your own mind to pick and choose? Or if you don't trust your own mind, and if you recognize, which is humility and honesty, by the way, humility, honesty, knowledge are three that more or less the same thing. Because if you're humble, you're being honest, and if you're being honest, then you're aware of one's own limitations and avidya and ragas and dveshas and kleshas. Then you seek help from beyond that, and so and then if you seek help from beyond that, then you locate something that you trust as a text, a guru, whatever it is, and then and then rather than picking and choosing, which is the nature of the mind, which is raga dvesha, which is the nature of the mind when it's under the kleshas, which is like, dislike, pick this, not that, pick this, not that.
Attachment,
That's the klish, attachment, aversion. That's the klishta mind, the mind of the kleshas. You want to get out of that. Then at some point you have to say, okay, well, I've examined various paths. My samskaras in this life resonate with this path. I'm going to go deep in this. At some point you go deep, because otherwise we're just surface level. We might become more sattvic, and we die. Next birth might be a little bit more sattvic, but we're not going to become enlightened.
So maybe the more intense practitioners will really go and dive more deeply into some of these practices, and the more mild practitioners maybe will, kind of just stay at the not going to the ocean, but just kind of stay on the outside.
Half in, half out,
yeah,
and
just
out.
one little foot. Yes. But the real ones are going to go and...
I think so. Patanjali says, and there's a verse in the Yoga Sutras, that it's near for those who are intense, and then, how does he say it? And then for those, he says there's intense, middling, and light.
And even in the middle, intense and light, then there's the
intense.
Exactly. So...
And part of that intensity, I think what I'm trying to say is, at some point we need to go beyond the raga dveshas of our own mind, and that means not picking it. At a certain point, we stop picking and choosing, and we surrender to a tradition that is time tested, that's been around, that has had generations of practitioners who have all verified the results, as in any even science is like that. It gets handed down, and we will find in almost all of these traditions, with a few exceptions, but almost all, tapas, discipline, is fundamental. And that, whether it's fasting, whether it's celibacy, or all of these things, but it means to start to control the body and the urges of the body. and the urges of the mind. And at some point there has to be a yatna. There has to be an effort to do that. An effort to, if we want to go beyond the body-mind, it's obvious. It's so obvious. If we were trying to get to a state beyond body-mind, at some point we have to start controlling the body and mind. I mean, that's fairly, there's nothing startling about that. And that means tapas.
It sounds really easy.
It does, yes. But you know, it's like you know, like anything else. When you do it, when you give up those attachments, like giving up possessions. All of a sudden, it's a relief. You think, why didn't I do that before? I was clinging onto these things, and it was causing me anxiety, and I had to maintain them and worry about them. And you give them up, it's such a relief.
Then you're
It's
free.
the same with desires, because they never satisfied us in the first place. That's the Maya. The Maya is we think, oh, they make me happy, but they just made us suffer. We just don't know anything else, so we cling on to them.
You want some chocolate?
Take my chocolate.
Well, thank you for holding my hand along these very difficult texts to understand, because you've been, you know, helping me along this path of understanding, and at least being more interested in looking at them, because they can be complicated, they can be a little bit scary, and really reaffirming and helping me to understand them with all the questions. So thank you.
Well, thank you.
Thank you for being my philosophy teacher.
Why do we take a spiritual path in the first place? Because we're suffering. Because we're suffering, we're mentally unhappy, and that's why we seek some kind of truth. We seek a spiritual path because we're suffering. It's the first noble truth of Buddhism, sarvam dukkam. It's only when we realize that we're suffering that we consider taking a spiritual path. And so the problem with trusting our own mind is that same mind is what has caused us so much, you know, caused so many of our problems in the first place.
The sensual mind that is looking to be
it's
gratified.
looking to be gratified. It's not looking to perform too much tapas if it can get out, if it can wiggle out of it. So accepting a tradition means to accept an authority that's beyond your own mind. So, you know, so one chooses, obviously we read about the different traditions, and we examine them, we apply our intellect and critical, you know, analysis, and, you know, we use logic and all of that. It's not that we blindly take some blind leap of faith. So we scrutinize a tradition, but at a certain point, typically in India, a person then, if we do want to go beyond our own mind and its fickle choices, is we accept the entirety, the whole package.